This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Hey guys, time to get in on the action for the biggest moments in basketball with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projections, place your entry, and win up to 100 times your money. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit of up to $100. Just download the Prize Picks app and use the code GET100. That's code GET100 on Prize Picks for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more. Pick less. It's that easy.
We made this.
Welcome back, everybody, to the X-Cast. As ever, the truth is in here. I'm your host for this episode, Carl Sweeney, and thanks for joining me for this discussion about the 7th episode of Season 5 of The X-Files, which is Emily. And joining me today is Chris Knowles. Hey, Chris.
Hey. Long time no see.
Long time no speak. It feels like just a few minutes, but yeah. Now we're back, though, to discuss Emily, which was written by Vince Gilligan, John Shiban, and Frank Spotnitz. It's directed by Kim Manners. First aired on December the 14th, 1997. So it's interesting there that they didn't kind of time it so that Christmas Carol was the last episode to air before Christmas, isn't it?
Television scheduling was, very fraught business at that time. You know, you didn't have sort of the luxury of building up an entire season and just streaming it all at once. You know, it's just a different world back then.
Right, so last time you alluded to the fact that you've recently reappraised Emily. So an upwards reappraisal, it sounded like. So yeah, what do you make of this one? How much... I mean, if Christmas Carol was a 10, what's Emily?
Oh, I'd give it an 8.
Yep.
Now. I might have been a bit lower. I've never disliked this episode, but it didn't seem to be a consistent follow-up. But I think, in hindsight now, it's Christmas Carol almost to me feels like a standalone.
Yeah.
It doesn't really feel like a two-parter in the conventional X-Files two-parter formula. It feels a bit more like we have a standalone followed by a sort of standalone mythology episode. That's kind of the way it feels to me. And I do think it's very interesting that when they did the mythology box set back in 2005, this two-parter was not included. And you had, you had things that were just not really mythology episodes in any particular way, like SR819 and NME that could have there was space to to put this two-parter on. Just bump those 2 episodes, which I don't think really added much to the discussion, but whatever. That's television for you.
So yeah, I would drop it down 2 as well. So I was an 8 for Christmas Carol and I'm a 6 for this, but it is like they're kind of very different things, isn't it? And in a number of ways, like it's the extent of Mulder's involvement. It's like the dream imagery from the first part doesn't carry on over into the second. You have the supporting characters from the first episode are much less prominent in this one. And I think that some of the elements that emerge here are a bit more kind of perfunctory, aren't they? So I think even if someone didn't like Christmas Carol, I think they'd have to concede that it was an episode like no other. But here you can see the influence of episodes like Memento Mori a bit more clearly, can't you?
Yeah, it almost seems like a sequel to Memento Mori and not to Christmas Carol. At least for me personally. You could have... it feels like part 2 of Memento Mori in a lot of ways, and I don't see that necessarily as a criticism, but it just seems like they were kind of going back to that well.
Yeah, and like we say, it marks a very obvious point of distinction with Christmas Carol. But I think if you allow for those differences with the earlier episode, I think some people do really dislike this one, but I think it does what it's trying to do quite effectively. Ruthlessly effectively in some cases, like you could argue manipulatively, but the performances are good, it moves along at a fair clip, and there are some scenes and moments that we'll come on to discuss that really stand out, but I think it's just the eternal thing, isn't it, that the first part kind of set the bar very high.
Well, I'll tell you something else too, is that you had this weird situation where you had this kind of like Mulder is like not a believer or he's a believer. I mean, it's just, you had this weird space that Mulder was still in his arc at this point in time. And I'm not exactly sure that the writers really know what to do with him. I know they did not want to write that arc. They were really resistant to that, which is why I think it was dispensed with, pretty much halfway through the season. I think they just were having a hard time finding Mulder's voice in his new role. And I think that's kind of what and plus he's very angry and bitter and slappy and he's slapping guys around. It's just, and that to me seems like, it seems to me like Frank liked to write this, write Mulder as like kind of a dick.
Just in terms of in the fan reaction, I think IMDb has this one at 7.8 out of 10, which is just 0.1 below Christmas Carol. So not much in it at all. But yeah, I think generally the consensus seems to be that Emily is the weaker part. But there's still a lot of interesting stuff here. So yeah, let's discuss it in a bit more detail. And I'm desperate to get your take on this teaser, because it's fascinating, isn't it? So with the Scully voiceover, of course, and we see her walking through the desert landscape as the wind kind of whirls around her, picks up the cross from the ground, and she turns into sand. So what's going on here? I think you're the person to help me out with this. What are they alluding to?
Well, I'll tell you, there are two ways you can play this. I mean, first of all, you can sort of see this as a continuation of those kind of weird quasi-dream sequences that we saw in Christmas Carol. But this speaks to something that you and I have discussed quite a bit, and that's this ancient mythology that the X-Files draws on again and again and again, and that's Demeter and Persephone. So what we're seeing here is Scully playing the role of Demeter, because in the myths, Persephone is abducted and taken down to hell by Hades, and Demeter cannot find her, and as she wanders the earth looking for her daughter, the world turns to sand or dust, depending on which rendering you happen to read of it. So, but basically the world goes barren as she's looking for her lost daughter. And also that fade out, just before the credit sequence reminds me a lot of, I don't know if you've ever seen the Ken Russell film Altered States.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and there's of course there's a tie-in here because the mysteries of Demeter and Persephone, the rituals were based on hallucinogenic drugs, a compound called LSA that was made from it's a precursor to LSD, and it's made from wheat rust. So I think that there's a lot of conscious effort to make those parallels. And this is clearly Chris Carter's writing, because we have that sort of the deathless prose. Going alongside this. At the time I really enjoyed it. I mean, I really thought it was, it's just, but it's also the kind of thing that, there was always a surprise with this series. I mean, who would have expected this very, abstract and impressionistic, teaser to this series? I don't think a lot of people would have. So, but again, it's just, what we're seeing here in this two-parter is, what we see throughout the series, which is this whole mythology of the lost child, and in this case the lost daughter. So very much a through line on this show.
Yeah. So what I was wondering, and I guess I'm asking you to speculate a little bit, but how much do you think that is organic here, or how much is it something that's been grafted on? Because like last time we spoke about how Christmas Carol had been kind of a last-minute thing. Like, do you think they would have got the basic building blocks of what's going to happen to Scully and then realised it corresponded to things like you just said? Or do you think it would have been thinking of the mythological allusions and then mapping it onto their characters? How do you think that kind of tended to work.
Well, honestly, I'll tell you what I think happened. I think that, we talked about in Christmas Carol how they had to recast the actress who played Emily and replace her with Lauren Dywald, who had been in an episode earlier in the year with on Millennium, an episode called Monster, which also had Tony's favorite actor,
Pusher,
Pusher in it,
Robert Wisdom,
Yeah, I think I'll tell you exactly what I think happened. I think that, they reshot a lot of these scenes. There was probably a lot more stuff with Emily on the floor that they could not reshoot in time. So I think they sort of came up with this deficit, and they just had to quickly compose something for the teaser, and they didn't have enough footage to fill it out. That's what I think happened. It reminds me of Unrequited, where they did the whole the Outer Limits teaser
in media res.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think in this case that it's just they had to do something quickly because of the problems with the actress and the recasting.
I think what it made me feel like this time is like, and it's a good point you make that it's kind of in an extension of the dream imagery from the first part. And I was thinking in the first few minutes of this, well, actually, this is more like Christmas Carol than I remembered because of that, and because of Mark Snow's score, of course, is in continuity with it. But then Mulder turns up, and yeah, what do you think about him here? Because it's almost inevitable, isn't it, that things would start to be a bit more, I guess, formulaic with him on the scene. And there's nothing wrong with well-executed formula, but it just sits a little uneasily coming off the back of such a Scully-centric piece, I guess.
Yeah, and I'll tell you something. We have this this entire episode where we just get to stare into Gillian's beautiful eyes and just, be entranced by her character and her astonishing physical beauty. And then Mulder shows up and he's just kind of like a dick. So it's a little bit of a break. It's not quite as captivating, where you can just sort of get lost in Scully's eyes and lips and all that kind of thing. And here we just have like Mulder slapping people around for no reason.
Although we do get the Mr. Potato Head impression, which is a nice bit of...
We certainly do. We do. And we also have just like a lot of these beautiful external outside shots where San Diego looks absolutely nothing like San Diego. It looks every bit like Vancouver in the late fall. So...
That's the perennial thing, isn't it? They say, but yeah.
I never noticed it at the time. It's that sort of magical spell the show had where you didn't really notice it, but as soon as they moved to California, boy, I'm like, whoa, there's California. That is not, Kansas or New Hampshire or whatever the hell they're supposed to be doing these episodes. That is California. Yeah. California looks like California, and it doesn't look like anywhere else in the country.
Yeah, and I think also an international audience would not care about any of those things in the first 5 seasons, but they would care that the show felt so much different in season 6, perhaps. But anyway, I mean, Mulder's attitude is weird, isn't it? Because, like you say, he seems irritated not to have been consulted a little earlier. He said she was a miracle it was never meant to be, about Emily. So, I don't know, it feels to me like the first part emphasises Scully's doubt, and here Mulder comes in with these well-defined ideas, and it just doesn't seem to work quite as well. Because ultimately Scully builds up to the stage where she restates a variation of what he says at the outset, doesn't she? And I don't know, given the way things played out with Scully previously, I don't know, it might have been nice to see them approach that kind of knowledge together, rather than to have Mulder come in and kind of say what's what,
Well, what I kind of wonder, so we've discussed my more recent fan theories about the show. It almost seems to me like Christmas Carol happens in real reality, like the real reality that Mulder and Scully are living in. And then it's just back to this like weird hypnotic dream reality that these people are, experiencing because their real job is to find all the experiments that got loose and kill them off. It's just like, you could, if you look at the series in that context, it makes like way too much sense. So, you start to wonder if this is like they're back in their hypnotic delusions. I mean, I don't know. It's certainly something that I don't think a lot of fans want to hear, but it makes sense. So yeah, you are back in the X-Files. You are back in specifically the mythology arc of the X-Files, which at this point in time was starting to get a little creaky from all the elements that they just kept throwing into the pot.
But what you just said is interesting, though, isn't it? Because, like, when Mulder interacts with Scully's family, you know, you get the awkward moment with Bill, of course. And the common complaint that Bill voices about Mulder is that he kind of takes over Scully's life. And then the episode itself is kind of consigning the Scully family to the sidelines because Mulder's back in this one, isn't it? So it is true what you say in some respects, I think.
Yeah, well, but also, you know, we have, so Mulder's out doing his business, but, you know, Scully is attending to, you know, a sick child in the hospital, or in hospital, as you people like to say over there. So, and it's interesting too, because it's like, it's really the kind of drama that, if you're a parent, is very gripping. You know, that, believe me, nothing gets you, I mean, you know this yourself. I mean, nothing gets your attention like having a very sick child in the hospital. You know, I mean, like there's nothing more dramatic in your life than that. And boy, I'll tell you, when my kids, or at least when my boys were sick, we were in the hospital all the time because they would get these really high fevers. And, actually, you know, my son, when he was born, he had to have surgery. So, I mean, I got a lot of this, you know. My first son was also bit by a dog in the eye and had to have surgery on his eye. So, that kind of thing, really, unless you've been through it, it doesn't seem as dramatic as it is. But, you know, again, I mean, the show wasn't just being watched by teenage girls. I mean, it was being watched by everybody. So I think a lot of the people like me and maybe some, you know, other older viewers and people with families, you know, they would understand, you know, the dramatic context that this story is taking place in.
I think also that there's more to be said about Mulder's attitude here, though, because like that hearing they go to, where things get a bit kind of testy between Mulder and the judge, but there's that moment, isn't there, where Scully's kind of watching on. She just looks astonished, doesn't she, when Mulder's talking about her over?
Yeah, oh God, yeah.
But doesn't it seem odd that Mulder didn't at the very least give her a heads up immediately prior to the hearing, even if you cut him a bit of slack for keeping some of that info from her in the first place?
Mulder's a bad boyfriend, you know. He really is. He's a bad boyfriend and he's a bad partner. And Scully is, you know, she's sort of the long-suffering wife in that regard. And you know, Mulder is, and again, this is great writing because it's very perceptive and sensitive writing where, you know, Mulder is sort of grieving for his lost, you know, the purpose to his life, or really maybe in this sense, the delusion that was helping him deal with the loss of his sister. So he's very angry and he's very bitter at this point in his life. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think that's well played and appropriately played. And, you know, just the way, you know, Gillian plays off of that is, just so phenomenal. She's so great this season.
Really good in this one, as well as Christmas Carol. And she does ask him, to be fair, why he didn't tell her, doesn't she? And his rationale is that he thought he was protecting her. And she kind of lets it slide, but I don't know. I feel like a different episode maybe would have got into that a bit more. Do you think it kind of brushes past it a bit, though, the implications of that?
I think it could have been. Everything in this episode could have been handled better. You know, I mean, I have a higher bias, you know, when it comes to ranking these episodes than other people do, and you know, particularly the X-Files. I you know, my curve is always you know, leaning towards the higher end of the spectrum. So I think this episode could have been much better handled, but I always kind of get the sense that because of everything that was going on with the casting, and it seems like they were a little bit frenzied here, and everybody's, you know, getting close to break, and, you know, actually, I guess probably the episodes that would have been filmed closer to break would have been Kitsunagari and Schizogyny probably would have been filmed right before break. And then, you know, you have this month-long interim between Schizogyny and the underwhelming Chinga or Bung Honey or whatever the hell it's called. So an episode that I never, you know, so I rewatch all these episodes like a mental patient, but I never rewatch Chinga.
Which is odd, isn't it? Because on paper, you'd think, well, Stephen King and the X-Files, that's a pretty good match, you know.
Well, you know, it's kind of like sauerkraut's good and vanilla ice cream is good, but is sauerkraut vanilla ice cream good? I mean, you know, sometimes things just don't work.
Yeah, and this episode, though, is it's just more standard, isn't it? So like when the call comes in and nobody speaks, but it's not played in the same way as the calls from the first part. It's just a standard investigative beat that leads them to the kids' centre, you know. And they find Emily with a fever. Mulder notices the green cyst on the back of her neck.
Well, that scene, that wrecks me. Like that whole scene.
Just the idea that she's kind of so vulnerable, you mean? Or?
Yeah, well, I got to say, again, this weird timing. So around that time, my second son had developed this, I don't know if it was a cyst. He had this sort of growth in his neck. And it turned out that it was, like impacted lymph nodes. And, so again, it's like if you're not a parent and you haven't been through those kind of dramas, you're not going to appreciate that. But when that whole, and I love the way David plays it, by the way, too, because his whole persona kind of changes from being like this slappy dick to being like really sensitive and paternal. So I love that scene. But doesn't it look like the same room, the exact same room where they shot that scene with, that Russian guy and Terma?
Yeah.
It just, maybe it isn't, but it's just like, it seems like, they redressed it from being, for old folks to being for young folks. So
yeah, because it's not just Memento Mori that is reminiscent, that comes to mind here, because there are other things like, there are a few things that make you think of Tunguska Terma. I think Mulder at one point alludes to the events of Colony and Endgame, doesn't he? I don't know, I guess it feels like a retread, though, in some ways, rather than an extension, perhaps.
Yeah, well, again, I mean, who knows what, maybe they had put, all the magic into Christmas Carol and just sort of like, oh, we've got to write a second part now.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's just, cut and paste this and this and this and this and
and the time crunch.
Send it up to Vancouver so they can start shooting so everybody's not getting paid for sitting around on their butts,
So, we get that scene with Mulder smacking Dr. Calderon around while he's talking about how him and people like him are medical rapists. And you make a good point, I think, about the hospital drama. I guess what it means is that you've got Mulder putting all the legwork while Scully stays with Emily. And, I mean, there's no reason you can't do that. Have episodes where she's more passive and he's more proactive, but...
How is she passive? I mean, she's not passive at all. I mean, she's kept in a more limited location, let's say, while he's off doing X, Y, and Z. But yeah, but what she's doing is very, very important. She's trying to keep a young girl alive, and he's just running around slapping people for no reason. And again, like it's just. I mean, would he really have been able to get away with assaulting somebody with a gun in front of witnesses? You don't think somebody went on the phone to the FBI as soon as he left the building? It's just like a little, that seems a little frank to me. Frank and his sort of James Bond instincts, I think, kicked in a bit there.
So, I mean, there are some moving aspects of this, aren't there? Like the exchange with Scully where Emily says that Mommy had promised him no more tests, and that whole thing where she has to go into the machine and she's just kind of assaulted with the light and the noise, and Scully, of course, is shaken by it. And this is the scene you mentioned. Is it the one that the original actress couldn't cope with? Yeah.
Yeah. But also, I mean, I want to give props to the guy who plays the doctor because, first of all, he's entirely convincing as a pediatrician. And second of all, I mean, I love the exchanges, these very kind of awkward exchanges, between, he and Scully. I love that line, which one of you is the mother?
Yeah.
Just, I don't know, that stuff. I mean, again, maybe it's because of, being a parent of 3 kids and haven't been in that situation, but boy,
And all the stuff where he talks about that Dr. Calderon's not playing ball and he doesn't know if Scully's got the proper authority. And he's just like, look, this is beyond me, he's really good at that. I guess with Emily, so we talked a bit about how her character was kind of set up in the last episode. And I guess the most interesting aspect of her for me is what happens to her has an effect on Scully. And I guess because this episode becomes a more recognizable mythology installment, the trajectory just starts to seem a bit inevitable, doesn't it? Whereas with Christmas Carol, I think it was much harder to kind of call the twists and turns of that one in advance. You know what I mean?
Well, I think what happens with Scully here, and I think it's something that they don't call attention to it while another show would, is that, Scully, after she sees that cyst, she knows what Emily is. You know, she knows, okay, well, she was born or she was made using my genetic material, but she's not even human. She's not even a human being. You know, she's not, you know, because she's going to have that sort of maternal instinct in the sense that this is her daughter and sort of be hung up in the drama of that. But she's also realizing that, okay, she might not be thinking she's specifically an alien at this point in time, but she understands that this is, you know, because she had gotten the whole gist, I mean, all the way back in Erlenmeyer Flask. So she understands that there are people out there who are not exactly human beings. They're genetic experiments. And again, she might not be thinking of the whole alien thing per se. But, you know, another thing that I've got to really point out here is that, so we had this major left turn, particularly in the 11th season with, you know, that unfortunate episode, the first
My Struggle to
Free. Which is just absolute trash. But you know, the way they had sort of repurposed the whole storyline to be about this, you know, these genetic experiments and everything like that. And a lot of people were like, well, you know, where the hell did this come from? But where it came from is episodes like this. Where it came from was episodes in the 9th season. Where it came from was Erlenmeyer Flask. Where it came from was Nisei at 731 when, you know, she wasn't abducted by aliens. She was abducted by, you know, these concentration camp doctors who were doing these horrific experiments. So I think that, again, well, let me just say outright, and I probably said this before, but I don't really see 10 and 11 as canon. I see them sort of as apocrypha. But I don't think that whole arc was just fell in out of the blue sky. And let me just go on record again, and I don't think that cigarette smoking man is William's genetic father. I think that he is, you know, that Scully got pregnant prior to NME from Mulder, and he went in and messed with the embryo or whatever. So let me just go on the record that I do not believe that he is William's biological father. I just want to make that clear. And again, we're also looking at apocryphal stories here. Fanfic, really, you know, fanfic by the creators of the series.
Expensive fanfic.
Yeah, expensive fanfic. So, I just want to go on the record that, and I know a lot of fans still get upset about that, but, I mean, even in the context of these apocryphal stories, I don't think that cigarette smoking man is actually William's father. Anyway, but so that's, you know, this is really where it's coming from. And, I think that Scully, you know, there's a turn in her attitude towards Emily because she realizes that she's an experiment that is breaking down, and she could keep her going with these injections. I'm sorry, by Dr. Calderon, but you know, who knows how that would turn out. And I think she kind of understands that Emily is like doesn't really have recognizable human emotions. You know, that she's just sort of. Again, she's an experiment. She's something that not a human offspring.
Yeah, well, that idea goes back even earlier than Erlenmeyer Flask, doesn't it? Because I think Eve, in that episode, is a character who says something that, along the lines of, these children just weren't meant to be, you know, which is almost verbatim what is said a few times in this episode, isn't it?
Well, I think what Cindy Reardon's mother says. Yeah.
Towards the end, yeah.
Love Eve. What a great episode.
Very good episode.
People don't really talk about that, but that is one of the best episodes that season in my estimation.
And again, but just considering the way the series developed, especially in the later years as well, like you say, but that looks even more pivotal, you know, in hindsight, doesn't it, than it did perhaps?
Well, that's where we first heard the term super soldier, so.
Yeah. So we get all this stuff with the shapeshifters, don't we? Where the real Calderon goes to those two guys and gets killed with the ice pick. And Mulder isn't as, you know, maybe he should be a bit he's not aware of all this, of course, but he's in this storyline with the shapeshifters. And I don't know, do you feel like, because you talked about the impact of episode 1 of Christmas Carol being devastating, but it seems like here you go quite quickly back and forth between some very emotional stuff in the hospital to a parallel storyline. You know, you see the shapeshifters walking down the corridor or whatever. And I don't know, do you feel like this has the same emotional impact? Or do you think those scenes kind of take away from it?
Yeah. I mean, this episode's sort of a hodgepodge, you know. I don't think they wanted to do a straight, you know, another Christmas Carol where they're just doing the Scully drama in the hospital, because I don't think that, I don't know if a lot of the fans would have patience for that. So, you know, it's kind of like it's neither fish nor fowl, you know.
Yeah, you get that split focus, and it, you know, that emotion in Christmas Carol felt very earned, didn't it? And here you're kind of carried along by the plot, but perhaps it's not as meaningful emotionally. That's what I think, yeah. And some of that stuff with the shapeshifters, it feels like stuff we've seen before, doesn't it? Because I think the episode I was thinking of was Talifakumi, you know, that scene where Scully sees the guy in the hall, gives chase, catches up with him, and he's changed, you know. That felt very familiar.
Yeah. So again, it is a little bit of a cut and paste, sort of like a little bit of an X-Files jukebox, you know.
And what do you think's going on with Kresge? Because his role here is much more limited, isn't it? And it almost feels like, I don't know. Do you think it's a bit obligatory? They just wanted to have him in again, but he didn't have as meaningful a presence. But...
Oh yeah, of course. And he's not even necessary. He doesn't really drive the plot the way he did in the first episode. But, you know, one thing Chris Carter said to me is that, you know, they saw John Piper Ferguson, his family, you know, and I think since he had done such a great job in Christmas Carol, I think they just wanted to bring him back for a few appearances and then just that sort of appearance in the climax. I do think that if 1013 had stayed where they belonged in Vancouver and developed more shows, that you probably would have seen John Piper Ferguson as either a lead or a co-lead in series. Maybe not something like Harsh Realm, which is, I mean, let me just say again that I think Harsh Realm is absolute garbage, but something along those lines.
And he'd been so good in F Masculata, of course, looking very different.
Yes,
season 2.
Yes, and he's also very good in one of my favorite episodes, Millennium Amnesis. So
yeah, so we get all this stuff at the care home, which again, this is where the Terma comparisons feel particularly apt, isn't it? The old women who have given birth recently. I mean, that gives us the excuse to see Frohickey, don't we?
Yeah, it's funny because there are a few episodes throughout the series where, it's like they didn't want to get, Bruce and Dean in, it's just like, well, we want that kind of, we need a little bit of exposition here. So, it was always just, you never saw an episode where it was just like, Byers, or Langley. It was always just him because he's on set because he's an assistant director. So quick, Tom, suit up.
Yeah. I tell you, it was really, just as a quick aside, the three of them, when they appeared on stage at the most recent X-Fest convention, they're very good together still, they're very good with the crowd and stuff, and very quick-witted as well when they introduced Unusual Suspects, so that was really fun to see. Right, so Scully here. So we get that stuff where Miss Chambliss, who's the woman from the county who was dealing with the adoption application, she turns up, and I like that scene because Scully's very resolute in defense, isn't she, when she talks about everybody who's responsible and all of that. So yeah, how would you kind of classify Gillian Anderson's performance here? Because, in the first part, she's kind of transcendent, and there are moments here as well where she's excellent too.
Well, it's funny because there are certain episodes of the X-Files where you just you see characters playing other characters' roles. So my pet theory here is that so Karen Chambliss was originally supposed to be Karen Kossoff, and that's the
okay. Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think the whole thing with the adoption, I think what happened is that Scully, maybe in original or in an earlier draft of the script, wanted to adopt Emily, and Karen Kossoff was called in maybe for some other reason. She was called in to consult on the case, whatever. Because the scenes, particularly in Christmas Carol, it's like I just keep picturing Karen Kossoff there. And again, I even in the second part of the series, you could just trade out that character very easily. And I just wonder if the actress was just not available at the time. I mean, that's just my pet theory. I have a lot of pet theories.
Yeah. So Mulder has his little investigation, doesn't he, where he finds the fetus that had been stored in the refrigerator that's moving, and he finds the reference to Scully on the paperwork that accompanies it and so on. And he takes those vials of liquid as the shapeshifter arrives, and we have that whole thing where the shapeshifter's approaching him and Kresge. Kresge obviously doesn't know what he's dealing with. He shoots him. But at least, I mean, they point out, don't they, that Kresge is recovering at the end of the episode. So it seems like they wanted to explicitly keep him alive, it seems, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think, again, I mean, I think they really like that actor. And, they probably just kind of thought like, well, let's just, keep him around. Just as an aside here, I'm just looking at the IMDb, and Kristen Willis, who played Karen Kossoff and also played the nun in Founder's Mutation, she was doing a series called Mercy Point at the time, so she probably wasn't available. So that, I think that kind of confirms, or at least partially suggests that, my guess is not too far off.
So back at the hospital, and Mulder joins Scully when Emily's gone into a coma, hasn't she? And Scully's feeling that this is what's meant to be. She wouldn't treat her, she says, even if there was a way to do so. So that kind of throws up a whole lot of questions, doesn't it? Like, should Mulder have acted differently? Is Scully correct in her assessment? Is there something a bit unfortunate about this suggestion that just because Emily was created to serve this agenda, like, she couldn't have had some kind of meaningful future? I mean, I know they kind of stack the deck for that, don't they? She's got this very painful situation and so on. But yeah, what do you think?
Well, I think there's a bit of maybe a subtext here that kind of gives it a bit of, maybe a little bit of added friction for me. And that's like Mulder and Scully are both coming to the conclusion that there are a lot of people running around who are not human, and they're being created for unwholesome reasons, let's just say. So I think that that kind of ruthlessness, which is never outwardly addressed, but to me seems to be part of, the unspoken undercurrent there, is that, they know that these hybrids or whatever Scully or Mulder at the time sort of sees them as are not good, and also the fact that, this, when Mulder says, this is just medical rape. I mean, this child is so she's not only not actually human, but she's, conceived through a medical rape. So I think that, that kind of works for me. If this was just a girl, it's just a child, Scully wouldn't ever allow that to happen. I mean, she could, have terminal stage 5 cancer and Scully would be there around the clock trying to save her. So I think that's the kind of the unspoken undercurrent to that whole storyline there.
Like you say, it makes sense given the broader kind of narrative context, I think. I think this is where the people who really dislike Emily, I think this is where they're coming from, I sense. And I think that I don't think we're supposed to read the episode as like an allegory in like a conservative way or anything. I'm not sure I don't think they were trying to suggest that only traditional families are sustainable or anything like that. I think it's just a bit of a consequence of the more cluttered nature of this story that the episode directs us to a point where Scully's decision is the logical choice. They plant that seed early on with what Mulder says when he turns up, and then we spend the rest of the episode getting to that point. And I don't know, it feels a tad calculated, but again, there are all these things that carry us through it, aren't there? Like the performances are great, the music does the job, and so on. So
yeah, I mean, and even though, again, I can't imagine for the life of me why they didn't include it in the box set. That it doesn't really get its props. It does very much drive the whole myth arc forward, and it very much leads us into the things that we'd see with William. Because she's kind of a precursor to William. She's almost like a prototype. So I think that works very well, and and again, I mean, I do love these episodes, and I mean, I think that Emily is very deeply flawed in a lot of ways, but to me, it's like, listen, I'm not going to get any more of these, old school there's not a lot of these episodes sitting in a vault somewhere waiting for to be released. I mean, this is what you get. I mean, it's a it's a finite source to draw on. So, make the best use of it you can. So I do get a lot of it in that way.
And I think it ends pretty strongly because we get, there's that lovely transition, isn't there, from Scully lying alongside Emily on the bed to the stained glass window in the church, and there's been a bit of a time gap. And I suppose one thing about that is it kind of abridges what happens to Emily at the end, and I think that was probably a wise call, wasn't it? I don't think we needed to see an actual death scene or anything like that. It was kind of tasteful, this way of doing it, I suppose.
Yeah, well, again, there's the subtext, because it's like, she's comforting this child, but, as she says at the end, I mean, it's this child. And again, I think the subtext is like, this child wasn't meant to be, not only because she was conceived through medical rape and she's not actually human, but also like, they're not creating these children, for good reasons. They're creating these children to help, kill off the rest of us,
And at the church then, so we get the family again, don't we? Because we see Scully's mother, a nice embrace between the two of them. And Bill and Tara's child has now been born. So Matthew, I think his name is. Yeah, it's a shame. We already said this, I think, before, but it's a shame that we don't pick up with these guys again, isn't it? Because there's more that could have been done.
Yeah, and I think Pat Skipper and the woman who plays the wife there, I think they're both LA based. So yeah, it's interesting too, because I think that all right, so like I said before, I mean, I really just see this this series as sort of like the summit. This or the season in American parlance, as being the summit of the franchise as a whole. And, one of the things that you can't really discount. So when you're writing, for Los Angeles and you're writing for a vastly inferior pool of character actors than you have up in Vancouver. Yeah. That must be said. You're writing for a much, Los Angeles is horrible and demonic, and Vancouver is beautiful and lush and misty, and and also you know that every episode that you're going to write is going to be hemmed in by not only production costs but the horrific travel and traffic issues that you're going to have to deal with. So it just changes the whole focus of your writing. And again, I mean, I think this had a lot to do with the way that the colonization or syndicate arc is just kind of like just stopped. It's just like, all right, whatever. Okay, we're done. Cause it's just, again, it's just so many things sort of leading into this, but you can't discount just the incredible difficulties for production that they were facing. So it's very difficult to recreate that atmosphere that you had, and you had that, that great crew and that great, executive producer up there. You just don't have those things anymore. And, I know that they always spoke very, very highly of their crew in Los Angeles. And I'm sure they were wonderful. I'm sure they were just all terrific. And I'm sure everybody worked really hard and did great work. But, it's kind of like you break up with, the love of your life, and you sort of have the rebound relationship, and it's good and everything's fine, but the magic just isn't there. And I think that, that would be my epitaph for the series as a whole, is like, they did a lot of great work after that 5th season, but the magic was gone. The magic was out of it,
So, like, with the return to Vancouver, though, for I Want to Believe and for the revival, how much of that magic do you think they recaptured? Because I think it was variable, wasn't it? Like, season 10, they didn't seem to exploit it as well. But
well, season 10 was shot during the summer, and Vancouver in the summer is a much different city than it is in the fall or winter. Like it starts getting dark around like 3:30 or 3 o'clock in the fall and the winter. So you get a lot more variable lighting. Where are you in England? You're in Yorkshire, right?
No, the West Midlands. So we're kind of smack in the middle. We're about as far away from the sea as you can get in the UK.
But it probably when does it start getting dark in the autumn? Like probably around 3 or 4, right?
Yeah, at the minute it's about 4 o'clock. Yeah.
Yeah, so they were shot during the summer. I just nothing worked in season 10. It just everything was just wrong. Season 11 just is gorgeous and lush. And, that cinematographer they hired was just fantastic. Oh, I mean, whatever you can say about season 11, and I love season 11. You cannot say that it didn't look beautiful and wasn't shot beautifully, and just it really it didn't quite recapture the same look, but it had its own look, and I think it was magical. Yeah. I mean, and I love I Want to Believe, and I hope you can tell me anything bad about that movie. So, but that was not shot in Vancouver, really. I mean, that was shot up in like, what was it, Whistler or something. So up in the mountains, which is a whole different kind of deal. So.
Yeah, no, I've grown towards your take on I Want to Believe in the last couple of years, I must say. I appreciate it much more now.
And I loved it the first time I saw it. I was like, oh, this is a phenomenal movie. And then I go online and I read the horrible reviews, and I'm like, oh, the world doesn't work the way it's supposed to anymore.
I was just dispirited. I remember Friday night, opening night, and there was like 6 people in the cinema. You know, it's like, what? Anyway, what do you make of this ending then? Because we get, obviously Mulder turns up and he gives her that private moment at the coffin as he turns away as she opens the coffin. No body in there, but she retrieves her cross. So it kind of brings it full circle to that teaser in a way, doesn't it? It's a nice little scene, isn't it, to finish this episode?
Yeah, I never really understood. I mean, why is the sand in there? I mean, did they just put the sand in the coffin for the weight, or like did her body turn to sand? I mean, I never really kind of understood. I think that's more symbolic than anything else, you know. I guess the explanation would be that they just put the sand in the coffin to adjust for the weight differential, and they didn't expect anybody to be looking at a dead baby in the coffin. But it does have a lyrical beauty to it in that way.
All right, so let's just look at a few comments that came in about this episode. So Clara Cook says, I just wonder why we never heard about Emily again after these episodes. So I think Emily's afterlife on the show, I mean, we get All Souls, don't we? At the end, towards the end of the season. And then after that episode, I don't think Emily is explicitly referred to again.
Well, that's because they really felt burned by the reaction to the character. And I think Vince Gilligan at one point sort of alluded to that, you know, because he's one of the writers on these episodes. I think they sort of felt a little chastened by the reaction to the character, so they just kind of dropped it. But I love All Souls. All Souls, you know, I love that episode. And I guess you have to sort of know the milieu and the mythology and just that whole folklore that they're drawing from. But I think that's an absolutely brilliant episode.
All right, so Cheryl Betty says, I like Emily. It's obviously not the best episode by a long shot, but I never skip it and sometimes stick it on as a random watch. Should mention, though, that I'm not a myth arc lover, which is probably why this two-parter doesn't annoy me as much as it does others. I kind of just take it as its own thing. And that's probably a fair attitude to take, isn't it? I think more rewarding as a character piece overall than for its conspiracy elements, which, as we've said, are kind of reminiscent of other things.
Yeah, and again, I mean, like I said, you're not going to get any more 90s X-Files episodes out of the well, so appreciate what you got.
Okay, so Andrew Levitt said, after the brilliant character exploration that was Christmas Carol, Emily is a huge disappointment, trying to evoke the qualities of Memento Mori, and instead coming across as a schizophrenic episode that doesn't quite know what it wants to be, switching between Scully doing tests in the hospital and Mulder searching for the truth. The teaser is nice, the ending is touching, and Mark Snow's gentle score helps give the episode more emotional weight than its content offers. Nonetheless, it's a disappointing conclusion to a storyline that had a lot of potential. And finally, Cathy Glinski says, I find Mulder very frustrating in this episode. He's extremely patronising, thinking he knows what's best for Scully, continuing to keep secrets from her that directly affect her, telling a judge before he tells her, trying to solve her problems by beating up the bad guy, and Scully is given an emotional journey that doesn't seem quite earned. The episode tries to do too much and ends up doing too little. I suppose the thing with Mulder is, like, are we supposed to find him as patronising as he does appear, or is that a bit unintentional? You know, like, how aware of that were they, do you think?
Well, I think they intentionally wrote his character as being very unsympathetic in this mini arc in this first half of the season. I think that he was intentionally, and I think it was Robert Shearman who said, you know, that he appreciated how unsympathetic Mulder comes across when he's sort of mourning for the loss of his quest, you know. And, you know, I think that rings true.
Duchovny is good, isn't he, at playing unsympathetic? Like in Patient X, where he's just kind of really hard to take there, isn't he? And kind of insufferable. But he's extremely good at tapping into that.
Yeah, well, I think that feels very real, that the people who are on these kind of quests tend to be very narcissistic, take everything personally,
Yeah. All right, Chris, so we'll wrap up there. So, yeah, where can people find you online if they want to keep tabs on what you're doing?
Well, let me just plug my new book called He Will Live Up in the Sky, which will be available on Amazon and amazon.co.uk and hopefully other sellers by the time this airs. But I think any X-Files fan is going to really enjoy this book.
So this is fiction, right? Is it? It's not an investigative thing, or
it's fiction, but there's a lot of real life information written in. I call it a non-fiction fiction book.
Sounds really good. All right, cheers, Chris, and listeners. Yeah, just find us wherever you normally would: Twitter, Facebook, at the X_cast on Twitter, X-Files Basement on Facebook. That's it for today. We'll be back very soon, but until next time. Trust no one.
The X-Cast, an X-Files podcast, is produced and hosted by Tony Black, alongside a dedicated team of podcasters and X-Files fans. You can find the show on Twitter at the X_cast, on Facebook by typing in the X-Cast, or inside our group, the X-Files Basement, an X-Cast podcast fan group, plus on Instagram by typing in the XFcast. If you're a fan of the show, why not support us on Patreon? Exclusive bonus episodes, early access to new episodes, plus become part of our X-Cast community in the Patreon department. To see our monthly subscription options, just head to patreon.com/the Xcast. That's patreon.com/the Xcast. We'd love to see you join our Patreon community. We're also part of the We Made This podcast network at We Made This Pod on Twitter and We Made This on Facebook. You can find a range of shows on TV, film, music and popular culture in general on the network. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.